What if everything humanity believed about respect, hierarchy, and diplomacy was completely wrong? What if the most powerful beings in the galaxy didn't want formality and ancient protocols, but something far more dangerous to give, genuine honesty? In the vast expanse of space where civilizations rise and fall across millennia, where ancient empires span thousands of star systems, and where diplomatic protocols have been refined over millions of years, sometimes it's just being yourself. This is the story of how one human's complete inability to follow proper etiquette accidentally solved the galaxy's oldest problem, turned the most feared monarch in known space into an unlikely ally, and proved that sometimes the best diplomacy happens when you throw the handbook out the airlock and just treat people like people. But first, you have to understand what Marcus Chen was like before he became the most unlikely ambassador in galactic history. Marcus Chen had exactly 3 talents in life: fixing things that shouldn't be fixable, saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment, and somehow surviving situations that should have killed him 6 times over. On the day that would change the course of galactic history, he was about to use all 3. The maintenance bay of the UES Harmony buzzed with the controlled chaos of a diplomatic vessel preparing for the most important meeting in human history. Technicians scurried between control panels, engineers triple-checked every system, and diplomats practiced their formal greetings in 17 different alien languages. In the middle of it all, Marcus lay on his back beneath a quantum resonance generator, cursing creatively at a fusion coupling that had decided to malfunction 12 hours before humanity's first official contact with the Zephyrian Empire. "Chen, what's your status?" Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system, tight with barely contained stress. Marcus wiped grease from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a dark smudge across his weathered skin. "Well, Captain, the good news is I found the problem. The bad news is whoever designed this piece of junk clearly flunked basic engineering. Just tell me you can fix it." "Already did, but boss, you might want to consider upgrading your entire quantum array when we get back. This thing's held together with hope and spare parts." There was a pause. "Chen, did you just call me boss?" Marcus blinked. After 3 years aboard the Harmony, he'd never quite managed to break the habit of calling everyone from janitors to admirals boss. It had gotten him written up more times than he could count, but old habits died hard. Sorry, Captain, I meant Captain Morrison, sir. Just try to remember proper protocol when the Zephyrians arrive. The entire future of humanity might depend on making a good first impression." As Marcus crawled out from under the generator, he caught sight of himself in a polished bulkhead. His standard-issue coveralls were stained with lubricants and coolant, his black hair stuck up at odd angles, and he had that slightly wild look that came from too much caffeine and too little sleep. He looked exactly like what he was, a 32-year-old mechanic from the industrial districts of Luna Colony who'd somehow ended up on the most important ship in human space. The irony wasn't lost on him. While the ship carried linguists who'd spent decades studying Zephyrian culture, xenobiologists who could recite the evolutionary history of 100 species, and diplomats trained in the subtle art of interstellar relations, Marcus was there because he could jury-rig a hyperspace motivator with nothing but scrap metal and stubborn determination. "Attention all personnel," the ship's AI announced. "Zephyrian vessel approaching." All non-essential personnel report to designated areas immediately. Marcus gathered his tools, but as he headed toward his assigned station in the lower decks, the comm system crackled again. "Chen to the bridge. Emergency repairs needed on the translation matrix." He changed direction, jogging through corridors filled with nervous crew members. The bridge was a symphony of controlled panic when he arrived. Banks of monitors displayed the approaching Zephyrian dreadnought, a ship so massive it had its own gravitational field. The translation matrix, humanity's one hope of meaningful communication, sparked ominously in its housing. "What's the damage?" Marcus asked, already pulling out his diagnostic scanner. "Cascade failure in the neural network," reported Lieutenant Hayes, the chief communications officer. Her face was pale with stress. "We're getting maybe 30% accuracy on the translations." Marcus popped open the access panel and peered inside. The quantum processors were overheating, their crystalline structures showing stress fractures. Whoever calibrated this thing used the wrong harmonic frequency. Give me 10 minutes. We don't have 10 minutes, Captain Morrison said grimly. They're requesting permission to board. Then give me 5. Marcus dove into the matrix with the focused intensity that had made him the best mechanic in the fleet. His hands moved with practiced precision, rerouting power conduits and replacing damaged components. Around him, the bridge crew coordinated humanity's first contact with an alien empire, but Marcus tuned it all out. Right now, his entire world consisted of quantum pathways and harmonic resonance. Translation accuracy improving, Hayes reported. 60%, 70, 80, 5%. That's the best we're going to get. It'll have to do, Morrison said. Here they come. Through the bridge's main viewport, Marcus caught his first glimpse of the Zephyrian shuttle. It was a work of art, all flowing lines and crystalline surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. As it settled into the docking bay, Marcus realized he was still holding a plasma torch and wearing clothes that looked like they'd been through a small war. "Chan, get to your station," Morrison ordered. "Actually, sir," Hayes interrupted, "I'd like him to stay. If the translation matrix fails again, we'll need immediate repairs." Before anyone could argue, the bridge doors hissed open. The Zephyrian delegation entered with the kind of presence that made gravity seem negotiable. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their forms vaguely humanoid but clearly evolved under different conditions. Their skin had a crystalline quality that shifted between deep blues and purples, and their movements carried an alien grace that was simultaneously beautiful and slightly unsettling. But it was the figure at the center of the group that commanded attention. Even among beings that radiated authority, she stood apart. Her crystalline skin held deeper hues, patterns of silver and gold that seemed to move beneath the surface. When she turned her gaze on the human crew, Marcus felt like she was looking directly into his soul. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his posture rigid with formal protocol. "Your Imperial Majesty Zarathul Vexhani, Sovereign of the Seven Systems, Keeper of the Ancient Ways, I am Captain Morrison of the United Earthship Harmony. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you aboard our vessel." The translator worked its electronic magic, converting Morrison's words into a series of harmonic tones and crystalline chimes that somehow conveyed meaning. The Empress listened, her expression unreadable. When she replied, her voice was like music played on instruments made of starlight. The translation came through clear and formal. "Captain Morrison of the human vessel, we acknowledge your greeting. We have come to evaluate whether your species possesses the qualities necessary for membership in the galactic community." The conversation continued in the stilted, formal style of high diplomacy. Marcus found himself fascinated not by the words, but by the Empress herself. Despite the translator's best efforts, he could see micro-expressions crossing her alien features, and what he saw looked remarkably like boredom. As the formal pleasantries dragged on, Marcus noticed something else. The translation matrix was starting to overheat again. The quantum processors were redlining, and if they failed completely, humanity's first contact would become an exercise in charades. He slipped quietly to the access panel, trying to make emergency adjustments without drawing attention. But as he worked, he overheard the Empress's latest statement: "Your adherence to proper protocol is adequate. However, we have observed that many species say one thing while meaning another. How can we trust that your words reflect your true nature?" Captain Morrison launched into a careful, prepared response about human integrity and the importance of honesty in interstellar relations. Marcus rolled his eyes as he worked. The captain was a good man, but right now he sounded like a politician trying to avoid giving a straight answer. That's when the translation matrix decided to catastrophically fail. The harmonic tones cut out mid-sentence, leaving Morrison's words hanging in the air untranslated. The Empress tilted her head, and Marcus could see confusion ripple through the alien delegation. In the sudden silence, Marcus realized that everyone was looking at him. "Ah," he said, still holding his plasma torch. "Give me just a second here." But the Empress spoke first, her musical voice carrying what sounded like amusement. Without the translator, none of the humans could understand her words, but her tone was clear enough. Marcus looked up from the panel, meeting those alien eyes directly. Maybe it was the stress, maybe it was 3 days without proper sleep, or maybe it was just his complete inability to read a room. But Marcus found himself speaking before his brain could stop him. Look, boss, I know this looks bad, but your translator just fried itself trying to make us sound more impressive than we actually are. Give me 30 seconds and I'll have it back online, and we can all go back to pretending we're more civilized than we really are. The bridge fell silent. Every human face showed various stages of horror, from Hayes's wide-eyed shock to Morrison's expression of absolute terror. Marcus realized what he'd just done, called the most powerful being in known space boss, and basically admitted that humanity had been putting on an act. But the Empress's reaction wasn't what anyone expected. The crystalline patterns beneath her skin began to shift more rapidly, cycling through colors Marcus had never seen before. Her posture changed, becoming less formal and more interested. She spoke again, longer this time, her voice carrying tones that the broken translator couldn't process. Marcus found himself wishing desperately that he could understand her. That's when she did something that would be discussed by xenobiologists for decades to come. She laughed. The sound was unlike anything the humans had ever heard, like wind chimes made of crystal bells caught in a gentle breeze. But the meaning was unmistakable. She was genuinely amused. Marcus blinked. That's a good sign, right? The Empress stepped closer, her towering form somehow less intimidating and more curious. She spoke directly to Marcus, ignoring the formal delegation protocols entirely. "I really wish I knew what you were saying," Marcus muttered, then added hopefully, "But if you're not planning to vaporize us, maybe you could give me a minute to fix this thing?" She gestured toward the translation matrix, her meaning clear. The silence stretched, but it no longer felt hostile. If anything, Marcus could sense the Empress watching him work with something that felt like professional interest. "There," he said finally, replacing the last burned-out component. "Hayes, try it now." "Translation matrix online," Hayes reported, her voice barely above a whisper. The Empress spoke, and the mechanical voice of the translator filled the bridge. "Interesting. Your colleague speaks to me as an equal, not as a title to be appeased. Tell me, small mechanic, do all humans share this directness?" Marcus glanced around the bridge, seeing the mixture of hope and terror on his crewmates' faces. The smart thing would be to defer to Captain Morrison, to let the trained diplomats handle this delicate moment. The smart thing would be to apologize for his breach of protocol and fade into the background. Instead, Marcus did what Marcus always did. He told the truth. "Not really, boss. Most of the time we're just as wrapped up in formal nonsense as everyone else. But when something's broken and needs fixing, I don't have time for pretty words. I figure most problems are the same whether you're human or, Zephyrian? Did I get that right?" The translation carried his words, and Marcus held his breath. The Empress listened, then turned to address Captain Morrison. But instead of the formal protocols they'd been following, her voice carried a different tone entirely. "Captain Morrison, your mechanic has given me more honest communication in 5 minutes than most species manage in 5 years of negotiations. I am curious to learn more about humans who speak without the burden of excessive ceremony." Morrison looked like a man who'd been handed both a winning lottery ticket and a live grenade. "Your Majesty, Mechanic Chen is direct, but he means no disrespect." "Disrespect?" The Empress's laugh chimed again. "I have spent centuries listening to carefully crafted lies disguised as diplomacy. Your mechanic offers something far more valuable: authentic communication." She turned back to Marcus, who was trying to make himself invisible behind the translation matrix. "Tell me, mechanic, what do you think of our ship?" Marcus glanced towards the viewport where the Zephyrian dreadnought dominated the view. "Honestly, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The engineering must be incredible. I'd love to know how you managed to integrate organic crystal growth with quantum field manipulation. That should be impossible, but somehow you made it work." The translation conveyed his words, but Marcus could see he'd hit something significant. The Empress's crystalline skin patterns shifted to what he was learning to recognize as pleased surprise. You understand our biomechanical integration principles? Not really, Marcus admitted. But I can see the results. Whatever you did, it's brilliant. I'm guessing it took centuries to develop? Millennia, the Empress corrected. And you are the first alien to recognize the technical achievement without first asking about military applications. Captain Morrison stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, if I may, Mechanic Chen has a gift for understanding complex systems. Indeed. The Empress studied Marcus with those alien eyes. Tell me, Mechanic, what would you do if I offered to show you how our technology functions? Marcus's eyes lit up like a kid offered unlimited access to a candy store. Are you serious? I mean, would that be allowed? Because I'd love to learn, but I don't want to cause any diplomatic incidents or anything. The only incident, the Empress said, her voice carrying what Marcus was learning to recognize as amusement, would be if you refused my invitation. And that's how Marcus Chen, a mechanic from Luna Colony who couldn't keep his mouth shut and had never met a protocol he couldn't accidentally violate, found himself invited aboard the most advanced ship in the galaxy by its Empress, who seemed more interested in his honest curiosity than in humanity's carefully prepared diplomatic overtures. As the alien delegation prepared to return to their ship, the Empress paused at the bridge entrance. Captain Morrison, your mechanic will accompany us for the technical exchange. I believe this could be the beginning of a most interesting relationship between our species. Morrison nodded, looking like he wasn't sure whether to promote Marcus or have him committed for psychological evaluation. Of course, Your Majesty. Chen, try not to, well, just be careful. Marcus grabbed his toolkit, still not quite believing what was happening. Don't worry, Captain. How much trouble could I possibly get into? The collective wince from every human on the bridge suggested that everyone had a pretty good idea exactly how much trouble Marcus Chen could get into. But as he followed the Zephyrian delegation off the bridge, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before, the sense that his particular combination of mechanical genius and diplomatic disaster might actually be exactly what the galaxy needed. Behind him, Captain Morrison turned to Lieutenant Hayes. Open a channel to Earth Command. Priority 1. What should I tell them, sir? Morrison looked out at the alien dreadnought where his mechanic was about to become humanity's most unconventional ambassador. Tell them that first contact was successful, but that our carefully planned diplomatic strategy just got thrown out the airlock by a man who calls everyone boss and thinks protocols are suggestions. And that's good news, sir? Morrison watched as the Zephyrian shuttle, carrying Marcus and the most powerful being in known space, detached from the Harmony and headed back to the dreadnought. Hayes, I have no idea. But knowing Marcus Chen, we're about to find out just how much chaos one honest mechanic can create in the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. As the shuttle disappeared into the docking bay of the alien vessel, none of them could have imagined that Marcus's next slip of the tongue would reshape the political structure of 7 star systems, challenge thousand-year-old traditions, and prove that sometimes the most revolutionary act in the universe is simply treating everyone like they're human, even when they're not. The interior of the Zephyrian dreadnought was like stepping into a living crystal cave. Marcus pressed his nose against the shuttle's viewport, watching walls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns flow past as they moved deeper into the ship. Everything seemed to grow rather than be built organic curves and crystalline formations that somehow managed to look both alien and oddly familiar. This is incredible, he muttered, then caught himself talking out loud in front of beings who could probably hear a whisper from 3 decks away. Sorry, I don't mean to gawk like a tourist. Empress Zarathul sat across from him, her large form somehow elegant even in the confined space of the shuttle. Her crystalline skin patterns had settled into what Marcus was beginning to think of as her amused configuration, deeper blues with silver highlights that seemed to dance just beneath the surface. Tourist, she repeated, the translator making her musical voice sound almost mechanical. An interesting concept. When did you last see something that inspired such wonder? Marcus considered the question seriously. Honestly, every day. I mean, most people think mechanical work is just nuts and bolts, but every machine tells a story. Every system has its own personality. Take the Harmony's quantum resonance generator. It's temperamental, sure, but that's because whoever built it was trying something new. They pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and the machine remembers that ambition. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her attention focused entirely on Marcus. You speak of machines as if they live, don't they, in a way? I mean, they respond to how they're treated. A system that's maintained with care runs smoother than one that's ignored. A machine built with passion works differently than one built just to meet specifications. Marcus paused, suddenly self-conscious. Sorry, I get carried away when talking about engineering. Do not apologize for passion, the Empress said, and something in her tone made Marcus look up sharply. For just a moment, her formal composure had slipped, revealing something almost lonely. It is rare to encounter someone who speaks of their work with such genuine enthusiasm. The shuttle settled into the docking bay with barely a whisper of displaced air. As they disembarked, Marcus found himself in a space that defied every assumption he'd made about alien architecture. The bay was vast, easily large enough to hold 6 ships the size of the Harmony, but it felt intimate rather than imposing. Bioluminescent panels created pools of warm light, and the curved walls seemed to pulse gently, as if the entire ship was breathing. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Tide," the Empress said, gesturing with one elongated arm. Few aliens have seen the interior of a Zephyrian vessel. "I can see why you'd want to keep it secret," Marcus said, then immediately winced at his own words. "I mean, not secret like you're hiding something, but this is beautiful enough that everyone would want to see it, and I guess tourism isn't really compatible with running an empire." The Empress's skin pattern shifted to what Marcus was starting to recognize as surprise. "You think we restrict access to maintain exclusivity? Don't you?" For a long moment, the Empress was silent. When she spoke again, her voice carried a tone Marcus hadn't heard before, something vulnerable beneath the authority. "We restrict access because experience has taught us that most species see our biomechanical integration as either a resource to be exploited or a threat to be eliminated." Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." The small group of Zephyrian attendants froze. Marcus realized he'd just called the most powerful being in 7 star systems stupid. But before panic could fully set in, the Empress spoke. "Explain." "Well, I mean..." Marcus scrambled for words, then fell back on the only thing he knew. Honesty. "Look, boss, if someone gave me the choice between exploiting something beautiful and learning how it works, I'd choose learning every time. Exploitation destroys what makes something special. But understanding, that's how you make something even better." The Empress studied him for what felt like an eternity. Around them, the ship's bioluminescent pattern seemed to pulse faster, as if responding to some emotional undercurrent Marcus couldn't detect. "Come," she said finally, "I will show you something no alien has ever seen." They traveled through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they passed, walls flowing like liquid crystal to accommodate their passage. Marcus couldn't help himself. He ran his hand along the surfaces, marveling at the way they felt simultaneously solid and organic. "How do you control it?" he asked. "The biomechanical integration, I mean. Is it neural interface, genetic programming, some kind of quantum entanglement?" "All of those and more," the Empress replied. "But the foundation is something your scientists would struggle to quantify. Emotional resonance." Emotional resonance? Our technology responds not just to conscious commands, but to the emotional state of its operators. A ship operated by a crew in harmony functions differently than one operated by individuals in conflict. Marcus absorbed this information, his engineer's mind racing through the implications. That's why everything feels so alive. It's not just biomechanical integration, it's empathic integration. The Empress stopped so suddenly that Marcus almost walked into her. In 3,000 years of diplomatic contact, no alien has grasped that concept so quickly. Really? But it's obvious once you think about it. I mean, if you're going to build a partnership between organic and mechanical systems, emotion is the missing link. Machines can process data, organic systems can feel, but combine them and you get something that can think and care about the outcome. They entered what Marcus assumed was some kind of observation deck, though it bore no resemblance to anything human engineering had ever produced. Instead of windows, the walls themselves became transparent, offering a three-dimensional view of space that made Marcus feel like he was floating among the stars. "This is the heart chamber," the Empress said. "From here, the ship's consciousness connects to the emotions and intentions of the crew." In the center of the room, a crystalline structure pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns Marcus had seen throughout the ship. As he watched, the patterns began to shift and flow, creating complex mandalas of light that seemed to respond to his presence. "It's reading me," Marcus said with wonder. "The ship knows I'm here. More than that," the Empress said softly, "it knows what you feel." Marcus approached the crystal structure, drawn by an impulse he couldn't name. As he got closer, the patterns became more complex, cycling through configurations that somehow conveyed meaning without words: joy, curiosity, excitement, wonder, but also deeper emotions: loneliness, the weight of responsibility, a profound tiredness that came from centuries of careful isolation. "These aren't just my emotions," Marcus said quietly. "Some of these are yours." The Empress's skin pattern shifted to what Marcus now recognized as surprise mixed with something that might have been embarrassment. "The heart chamber reflects the dominant emotional presence. I should have warned you." Marcus turned to face her, and for the first time since meeting her, he saw past the royal bearing and alien physiology to something startlingly familiar: a person carrying a burden too heavy for anyone to bear alone. "How long has it been?" he asked gently. "How long has what been?" "Since someone talked to you like you were a person instead of an empress." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the ship's systems. The Empress's crystalline skin cycled through patterns Marcus hadn't seen before, deeper, more complex configurations that seemed to convey emotions he couldn't name. "I have ruled for 400 years, she said finally. "In that time, I have received millions of petitions, proposals, and formal addresses, every word carefully chosen, every phrase calculated for maximum diplomatic advantage. But no one," she paused, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "No one has simply asked how I feel." Marcus felt his heart break a little. "That sucks, boss." Despite everything, the formal setting, the cultural barriers, the fact that she could probably disintegrate him with a thought, the Empress laughed. The sound filled the heart chamber, and the crystalline structure responded with patterns of pure, radiant joy. "It does, as you say, suck," she agreed, and something in her voice had changed. The formal imperial bearing was still there, but underneath it was something warmer, more human. Though Marcus immediately caught himself on that thought. More genuine, maybe? More real? "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "And feel free to tell me to shut up if it's too personal. Given that you have already violated approximately 17 different protocols for addressing imperial persons, I suspect personal boundaries are not your primary concern." Marcus grinned. "Fair point. It's just, why did you really invite me here? I mean, I'm nobody special. I fix things and I can't keep my mouth shut. There have to be thousands of humans who'd be better ambassadors." The Empress moved to stand beside him, both of them looking out at the stars through the heart chamber's transparent walls. "Do you know what the greatest challenge of ruling an empire is, Marcus Chen? Please tell me it's not the paperwork." Another crystalline laugh. "The paperwork is manageable. The greatest challenge is that everyone lies to you. Not maliciously, necessarily, but they tell you what they think you want to hear. What they think will advance their agenda, what they think will keep them safe. After 4 centuries of this, you begin to forget what honest communication feels like." Marcus nodded slowly. "And then some idiot mechanic calls you boss and complains about your translator. And then," the Empress agreed, "some idiot mechanic treats me like a person who has opinions and feelings instead of a political abstraction to be managed." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching distant stars wheel slowly past. The heart chamber's crystalline structure continued its light show, but the patterns had settled into something peaceful, almost meditative. So what happens now? Marcus asked eventually. I mean, I can't stay here forever, and I'm pretty sure I'm not qualified to negotiate treaties or trade agreements. What makes you think those are the only forms of diplomacy? The Empress asked. Tell me, Marcus Chen, what do you know about the Galactic Council? Interspecies governing body, right? Representatives from all the major civilizations? Representatives, the Empress repeated, her tone carrying what Marcus was learning to recognize as frustration. Politicians and bureaucrats who have spent so long playing the game of galactic politics that they have forgotten why the game exists in the first place. Marcus turned to look at her. And why does it exist? To help different species understand each other. To find common ground between beings who evolved under different stars, breathe different atmospheres, think in fundamentally different ways, the Council was created to build bridges between civilizations. But it's not working. The last meaningful interspecies cooperation initiative was approved 67 years ago. The last time a new species was admitted to the Council was over a century ago. The representatives spend their time protecting their existing positions rather than exploring new possibilities. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing what she was telling him. You're bored. I beg your pardon? You're bored. Marcus repeated. You're the most powerful person in 7 star systems. You have access to technology most species can't even dream of, and you're bored out of your mind because everyone's too afraid to have an actual conversation with you. The Empress's skin patterns shifted through what Marcus was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of emotional processing. That is, not entirely inaccurate. So what if we tried something different? What do you mean? Marcus turned away from the stars to face her fully. What if, instead of sending another formal diplomat who's going to spend 6 months learning how to properly address every member of the Galactic Council, we sent someone who doesn't know enough about the rules to follow them properly? The crystalline patterns beneath the Empress's skin began to shift faster, cycling through configurations Marcus had never seen before. You are suggesting that your lack of diplomatic training is actually an advantage. I'm suggesting that maybe the problem isn't that humans don't know the right words to say. Maybe the problem is that everyone's gotten so focused on saying the right words that they've forgotten how to mean anything by them. The Empress was quiet for a long time, her alien features unreadable. Around them, the heart chamber's crystalline structure pulsed with patterns that seemed to reflect deep thought. There is a session of the Galactic Council in 3 standard days, she said finally. The agenda includes a proposal to establish new trade restrictions that would effectively prevent your species from expanding beyond your current star system. Marcus felt his stomach drop. They're going to box us in? Several species view humanity as a potential threat. Your rapid technological advancement, your aggressive expansion, your tendency toward... You mean they're afraid we'll mess up their carefully ordered universe? That is one way to put it, yes. Marcus looked out at the stars again, thinking about everything the Empress had told him. What if I could convince them that humans aren't a threat, that we're exactly what the galaxy needs, people who don't know enough to be afraid of breaking the rules? And how would you do that? Marcus grinned, the expression feeling strange on his face in the alien environment. The same way I fix everything else. I'll figure it out as I go. The Empress studied him for what felt like an eternity. When she spoke again, her voice carried a tone Marcus had never heard before, something that might have been hope mixed with anticipation. Marcus Chen, mechanic of the Luna colony, would you be willing to serve as humanity's representative to the Galactic Council? Me? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Boss, I don't know anything about galactic politics. I've never been to space before this mission. 3 days ago, I didn't even know aliens existed. 3 days ago, the Empress replied, I believed that honest communication between species was impossible. Yet here we are. Marcus looked around the heart chamber at the impossible beauty of the alien technology surrounding him, at the being who had shared her loneliness with a stranger simply because he treated her like a person instead of a title. He thought about Captain Morrison's careful protocols and prepared speeches, about the formal diplomatic processes that had somehow led to genuine understanding, about the way the universe kept surprising him by being bigger and stranger and more wonderful than he'd ever imagined. Okay, he said finally. but I'm going to need a better translation matrix. The one on the Harmony barely handles basic conversation, and something tells me galactic politics involves a lot more nuance than please pass the fusion coupling. The Empress's laugh filled the heart chamber with crystalline music. I believe that can be arranged. But Marcus Chen, I must warn you, once you speak before the Galactic Council, there will be no going back to your simple life as a mechanic. You will become the voice of humanity in ways you cannot yet imagine. Marcus thought about that, about the weight of representing an entire species to beings he'd never met, speaking for people he'd never known about issues he didn't understand. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt the same excitement he got when facing a broken machine that everyone said was beyond repair.
"Well, boss," he said,
"I guess we'll find out together whether the galaxy is ready for a little honest conversation." And as the heart chamber's crystalline structure pulsed with patterns of anticipation and hope, Marcus Chen, the mechanic who couldn't keep his mouth shut, began preparing to become the most unconventional ambassador in galactic history. The Galactic Council's meeting chamber was a monument to the idea that bigger was automatically better. Marcus stood at the entrance, craning his neck to take in the impossible scope of the space before him. The chamber was roughly spherical, easily a kilometer across, with seating areas for hundreds of different species arranged in concentric rings that rose toward a ceiling lost in atmospheric haze. Each delegation area was adapted for its species-specific needs. Some in pools of liquid methane, others in high-pressure atmospheric bubbles, still others suspended in crystalline matrices that hummed with electromagnetic fields.
"Second thoughts?" Empress Sarathul asked quietly.
She stood beside him in her formal ceremonial attire, looking every inch the ruler of 7 star systems. But Marcus had spent the last 2 days learning to read her crystalline skin patterns. "Definitely," Marcus admitted, adjusting the translation device she'd given him. It was far more advanced than anything human technology had produced. A small crystalline pendant that connected directly to his nervous system and promised real-time translation of not just words but emotional context, cultural subtext, and even species-specific humor. But I've had second thoughts about every major decision I've ever made, and most of them turned out okay eventually. Eventually? Well, there was that incident with the plasma conduit on Titan Station, but that only took out half a city block and they rebuilt it better anyway. The Empress's skin patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned meant affectionate exasperation. Perhaps save that anecdote for after the formal proceedings. They made their way to the designated area for the Zephyrian delegation, Marcus trying not to gawk too obviously at the incredible diversity of life forms around them. He saw beings that looked like walking trees having animated conversations with creatures that seemed to be made entirely of living liquid metal. A group of what appeared to be sentient crystals was harmonizing with entities that looked like they'd been carved from solid shadow. And in one corner, something that might have been a small star held in a containment field was somehow participating in what looked like a heated debate about trade regulations. "How does anyone get anything done with this many different species?" Marcus muttered. Very slowly and with great difficulty came a new voice. Marcus turned to see a being approaching their section. Vaguely reptilian, but with features that suggested both intelligence and deep weariness. Ambassador Korthas of the Veltar Coalition, he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I could not help but overhear you must be the human we have heard so much about." "Probably not much good," Marcus replied, extending his hand for a handshake and then remembering he had no idea if that was appropriate. "Marcus Chen. And yes, I'm probably exactly what you've heard." Korthas examined Marcus's extended hand with curious interest, then reached out with his own appendage, not quite a hand, but close enough. "I have been attending these sessions for 47 standard years, and this is the first time I have seen someone offer a greeting from their own cultural tradition without first researching the proper protocol for the recipient species. Is that good or bad?" "Refreshingly honest," Korthas replied, "though I suspect the hierarchs will be less appreciative." "The hierarchs? The 5 species that effectively control council proceedings," the Empress explained. "The Veltar Coalition, the Crystal Communion, the Thought Weavers, the Iron Brotherhood, and the Eternal Seekers. They have held their positions for over 2 centuries. Marcus looked around the chamber with new understanding. So this isn't really a council of equals. It's 5 big kids and everyone else trying to get their attention. Corthus made a sound that the translator interpreted as bitter amusement, an apt comparison. The hierarchs maintain that their experience and stability provide necessary leadership. Others might suggest that their primary concern is maintaining the status quo that keeps them in power. A deep harmonic tone filled the chamber, and the various conversations began to die down. At the center of the sphere, a complex holographic display materialized, showing what Marcus assumed was the session agenda. "First item," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, Proposal 7739. Delta, establishment of enhanced monitoring protocols for emerging species with aggressive expansion patterns. Marcus felt his stomach sink as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about trade restrictions. They were talking about putting humanity under some kind of galactic probation. The first speaker was a member of the Iron Brotherhood, a species that looked like they'd been built rather than evolved. Their representatives spoke in precise mechanical tones. Recent analysis indicates that the species designation human exhibits expansion rates 340% above galactic average, technological advancement curves that suggest potential instability, and social structures that prioritize individual initiative over collective harmony. We propose implementing Category 7 monitoring protocols pending full psychological evaluation of the species. Marcus leaned over to the Empress. Category 7 monitoring protocols? Essentially house arrest on a planetary scale, she whispered back. No expansion beyond your current system without council approval. Regular inspections, restrictions on technological development that might be deemed destabilizing. That's insane, Marcus said, not quite as quietly as he'd intended. Several nearby delegates turned to look at him. The Crystal Communion representative spoke next, their voice like the sound of wind through crystal caves. We understand the Iron Brotherhood's concerns, but perhaps Category 7 protocols are excessive. We propose Category 5 monitoring with graduated restrictions based on behavioral compliance. How generous, Marcus muttered. Ambassador Corthaz leaned toward him. You seem disturbed by these proposals. Disturbed doesn't begin to cover it. They're talking about caging an entire species because we're too aggressive and expand too fast. Has anyone bothered to ask why we expand fast and take individual initiative? The conversation around them was following the formal patterns of galactic diplomacy, carefully structured arguments, ancient precedents, elaborate courtesy between species that clearly had fundamental disagreements but had agreed to disagree politely for centuries. Perhaps, suggested the representative from the Thoughtweavers, we might consider the human perspective before finalizing any monitoring protocols. An excellent suggestion, agreed the voice from the Eternal Seekers, though we note that humanity has yet to formally respond to our invitation to address the Council. Marcus realized that everyone was looking at him, not just the delegates near their section, but beings throughout the vast chamber. The holographic display had shifted to show his image, magnified and broadcast for the entire assembly. That would be your cue, the Empress said softly. Marcus stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He'd given presentations before, but never to an audience that included beings who could manipulate matter at the molecular level and others who existed partially outside normal space-time. He began, then caught himself. He looked around the chamber, taking in the incredible diversity of life forms, the obvious intelligence and capability represented by each species, the sheer scope of what the galaxy had achieved by working together. You know what, he said, his voice carrying further than he'd expected thanks to the chamber's acoustics. I think maybe you're asking the wrong question. A rustling sound filled the chamber as hundreds of different species turned their attention more fully toward him. The formal agenda display flickered and changed, focusing entirely on Marcus. The wrong question? The Iron Brotherhood representative's voice carried mechanical precision and just a hint of what might have been offense. You're asking whether humans are too dangerous to be allowed to expand freely. But maybe the real question is why you're so afraid of species that think for themselves and solve problems creatively. The chamber went very quiet. Marcus could practically feel the weight of thousands of alien gazes focused on him. "I've been here for 2 days," he continued, warming to his theme. "I've listened to debates about trade regulations that have been going on for decades without resolution. I've watched committees form subcommittees to study the formation of working groups to evaluate the possibility of maybe someday addressing problems that affect millions of beings right now. The deliberative process ensures careful consideration of all perspectives," the Thought Weaver representative said, their mental voice somehow conveying both patience and condescension. "The deliberative process," Marcus shot back, "is an excuse for not making decisions. Look, I'm a mechanic. When a system breaks, you don't form a committee to study why it might have broken. You diagnose the problem and fix it. And from where I'm standing, the biggest problem facing this council isn't that humans expand too fast. It's that you've all gotten so comfortable with your carefully balanced stalemate that you've forgotten how to actually do anything." The response was immediate and explosive. Delegates throughout the chamber began speaking at once, voices rising in dozens of different languages and communication methods. The translation system in Marcus's pendant worked overtime, flooding his awareness with fragments of outrage, curiosity, agreement, and offense. "Order!" The commanding voice belonged to the Eternal Seeker's representative, a being that seemed to be composed entirely of shifting energy patterns. The human will explain these accusations. Marcus took a deep breath. He'd gone this far, might as well go all the way. "It's not an accusation, it's an observation. You have incredible technology, vast resources, and the combined wisdom of hundreds of species. So why do you have poverty in the outer systems? Why are there still conflicts that have been simmering for centuries without resolution? Why does it take decades to approve humanitarian aid for disaster relief? These are complex issues requiring careful balance between competing interests." "No," Marcus replied firmly. "They're complex issues that require someone to make a decision and take action, even if it's not the perfect decision, even if it might upset the carefully maintained balance of power." He looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien gazes as he could. "You want to know why humans expand fast and take individual initiative? Because we've learned that if you wait for everyone to agree before taking action, people die while you're debating. Because we've discovered that sometimes the best solution comes from someone who doesn't know enough about why something can't be done to give up trying. And this justifies ignoring established protocols and destabilizing existing agreements?" the Iron Brotherhood representative asked. "Sometimes, yeah, it does." Marcus's voice carried across the chamber with quiet conviction. "Let me tell you about the first time I met Empress Zara Thule. Your carefully planned first contact protocols said I should address her with 17 different formal titles and spend 20 minutes on ceremonial greetings. Instead, I called her boss and asked her to give me 30 seconds to fix a broken translator." A ripple of what the translator interpreted as shock ran through the assembly. Several delegates turned to look at the Empress, who had gone very still. "The result of this grave breach of protocol," Marcus continued, "was the first genuine conversation she'd had with an alien in 400 years. Because sometimes treating people like people works better than treating them like political abstractions." "You cannot base interstellar policy on personal anecdotes," the Thought Weaver representative protested. "Why not?" Marcus asked. "Every policy you have is based on someone's personal experience. The difference is that your policies are based on the experiences of people who've spent so long playing political games that they've forgotten what it feels like to trust someone." He turned to address the chamber as a whole. "You're afraid that humans will disrupt your carefully balanced system. You're right. We will. Because your system isn't working for anyone except the people at the top who benefit from maintaining the status quo. And what would you have us do instead?" The Eternal Seeker's energy patterns flickered with what might have been curiosity. Marcus looked around the chamber one more time, taking in the incredible diversity of intelligence and capability represented by the assembled species. "I'd have you remember why this council was created in the first place. Not to maintain balance, but to solve problems. Not to preserve existing power structures, but to build something better." He paused, gathering his thoughts. You want to monitor humanity because we expand fast and think for ourselves? Fine. But here's the deal I'm proposing. Give us a chance to prove that rapid expansion and individual initiative can benefit everyone, not just the species doing the expanding. Let us show you what happens when you approach galactic problems with the assumption that they can be solved, not just carefully managed.
And if your approaches prove
Destabilizing? The Iron Brotherhood representative asked. Marcus grinned. Then you'll have learned something new about what doesn't work, which is more progress than you've made in the last century of careful deliberation. The chamber fell silent. Marcus could see delegates turning to speak quietly with their companions, energy patterns shifting in ways that suggested intense discussion, crystalline beings resonating with harmonics that carried meanings he couldn't interpret. Finally, Ambassador Korthaz stood up. The Veltar Coalition would like to hear more specific proposals from the human representative, as would the Crystal Communion, added their representative. One by one, delegations throughout the chamber began voicing their interest in hearing Marcus elaborate on his suggestions. Not unanimous support, Marcus could see species that remained skeptical or hostile, but enough curiosity to keep the conversation going. The Empress rose gracefully to her feet. The Zephyrian Empire formally sponsors humanity's proposal for probationary council membership, with graduated responsibilities based on performance rather than preemptive restrictions based on fear. Second, called Ambassador Korthaz. Third, added a voice from the Crystal Communion. As more species voiced their support, Marcus felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror. He just committed humanity to proving themselves worthy of galactic citizenship, and he had absolutely no idea how they were going to do it. But as he looked around the chamber at beings who were listening to him with genuine interest rather than polite tolerance, at species who were considering new possibilities rather than reflexively defending old positions, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before. The sense that maybe the galaxy was ready for a little honest conversation about how to build something better. So, he said, settling back into his seat as the formal debate began, I guess we're really doing this. We are indeed, the Empress replied, her skin pattern showing a complex mixture of pride, anticipation, and something that looked remarkably like hope. Now comes the hard part, which is actually proving that everything you just promised is possible. Marcus looked out at the assembly of beings who were now debating humanity's future with the same passion they'd once reserved for maintaining the status quo. Well, boss, I've never backed down from fixing something everyone said was broken beyond repair. I guess it's time to find out if I can fix an entire galactic civilization. And as the debate raged around them, Marcus Chen, the mechanic who couldn't keep his mouth shut, began planning how to turn the most powerful governing body in the galaxy into something that actually worked for the beings it was supposed to serve. Marcus found himself in what was possibly the strangest situation of his increasingly strange life. Sitting in the emergency session chamber of the Council's Emergency Response Center, surrounded by holographic displays showing 17 different crises happening simultaneously, while alien beings who barely understood each other tried to coordinate responses using protocols that hadn't been updated in 2 centuries. The Kepler 442 system crisis requires immediate humanitarian intervention, announced Coordinator Valshan of the Crystal Communion, her crystalline form resonating with stress frequencies that made Marcus's teeth ache. However, the established aid delivery protocols require approval from 7 different subcommittees before any action can be taken. The approval process exists for good reason, insisted Representative Korthaz, though Marcus could hear the frustration in his voice. Uncoordinated relief efforts can cause more harm than good. Tell that to the 3 million refugees who'll be dead by the time your subcommittees finish deliberating, Marcus said flatly. The chamber fell silent. It had been like this for the past 3 weeks. Marcus would point out the obvious, everyone would get uncomfortable, and then they'd spend hours debating whether it was appropriate to acknowledge reality. Perhaps, suggested the Thought Weaver representative with careful diplomacy, the human representative could elaborate on alternative approaches. Marcus looked around the chamber at beings whose individual species had solved problems that humanity couldn't even conceptualize, who possessed technology that could reshape matter at the atomic level. who had lifespans measured in millennia and wisdom accumulated over eons. And yet they couldn't figure out how to deliver food to starving people because their procedures manual said they needed a committee to approve the committee that would form the subcommittee to evaluate the need for a committee. "Okay," he said, standing up and walking to the central display. "Let me show you something." He touched the holographic interface, calling up the data streams from the Kepler 442 crisis. The display showed a solar system where a massive stellar flare had destroyed the agricultural infrastructure of 3 inhabited planets, leaving millions of beings without food production capability. "Here's the situation," Marcus said, highlighting different elements of the data. "Solar flare, predictable but unavoidable, 3 planets affected. Current food reserves will last approximately 47 standard days. Distance from nearest relief supplies, 18 days travel time. Time required for council approval under current protocols, minimum 64 days. He let that sink in before continuing. "Now, here's what human emergency response would look like." He began manipulating the display showing shipping routes and resource allocation. "Identify nearest available supplies," that's the Vegan Trade Consortium's grain reserves in the Altair system. "Establish direct contact with local authorities in both systems. Negotiate temporary agreements for resource transfer. Load ships dispatch immediately." "Without council oversight?" the Iron Brotherhood representative asked, their mechanical voice carrying what sounded like horror. "With council oversight happening in parallel, not in sequence," Marcus corrected. "You can debate the formal agreements while the food is already on its way. If you decide later that some adjustment needs to be made to the relief protocol, fine, but people don't starve to death while you're figuring out the paperwork." Coordinator Valshin resonated at a frequency Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "The human suggests bypassing established authority structures in favor of direct action. I'm suggesting that sometimes established authority structures are less important than getting things done," Marcus replied. "Look, in my world, if someone's house is on fire, you don't form a committee to study the best firefighting approaches. You grab the nearest hose and start spraying water. But what if you use the wrong type of water?" asked the Eternal Seeker's representative. "What if your intervention causes unforeseen complications?" Marcus stared at them. "What if you let the house burn down while you're debating water chemistry?" He could see he was losing them again, the alien minds retreating into the comfortable certainty of established procedures. "Time for a different approach." "Empress," he said, turning to Zarathul, who had been quietly observing the debate, "your people have been spacefaring for millennia. How did the Zephyrian Empire handle emergency response before the Galactic Council existed?" The Empress's skin patterns shifted to what Marcus recognized as thoughtful consideration. "We acted immediately to preserve life, then negotiated the political implications afterward. And did that approach work? We built an empire spanning 7 star systems and maintained it for 3,000 years. Marcus turned back to the assembly. "There's your precedent. Every successful civilization in this room got that way by taking action first and sorting out the politics later. The only difference now is that you've all gotten so comfortable with your multilateral decision-making processes that you've forgotten how to make actual decisions." "You are suggesting we abandon centuries of diplomatic progress," the Thought Weaver representative said. "I'm suggesting you remember what diplomacy is actually for," Marcus shot back. "It's not supposed to be an end in itself. It's a tool for helping different groups work together to solve problems. When your tool becomes more important than the problems you're trying to solve, you need a better tool." He walked back to the central display and called up a new set of data. "Here's what I'm proposing. We create a parallel system, a rapid response network that can act immediately in crisis situations, with formal council review and approval happening afterward. That would represent a fundamental change to galactic governance," Coordinator Valshin pointed out. "Good," Marcus said simply. "Your current system of galactic governance doesn't work." The chamber erupted in the now familiar pattern of outrage discussion that followed whenever Marcus pointed out uncomfortable truths. But this time, something was different. Instead of pure offense, Marcus could hear genuine consideration in some of the voices. questions about implementation details, concerns about oversight mechanisms, the sound of beings actually trying to figure out how to make something work rather than just explaining why it wouldn't.
Ambassador Korthus stood up, his reptilian features showing what Marcus had learned to recognize as resolve.
The Veltar Coalition is willing to participate in a pilot program for rapid emergency response with appropriate safeguards, as is the Crystal Communion, added Coordinator Valsheen, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics that suggested cautious optimism. One by one, species throughout the chamber began voicing their willingness to try Marcus's approach. Not all of them. The Iron Brotherhood remained skeptical, and several of the older, more traditional civilizations clearly viewed the entire proposal as dangerous radicalism. But enough voices joined the conversation that Marcus began to believe they might actually be able to make this work. "Very well," said the Eternal Seeker's representative. "We propose a formal trial period, 6 months, limited to natural disaster response, with full council review of all actions taken under the Rapid Response Protocol." "Agreed," Marcus said quickly, before anyone could start adding conditions that would strangle the program in bureaucratic red tape. "But I want to add one more element to this trial, which is—" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing he was about to suggest something that would either revolutionize galactic civilization or get him banned from ever attending another council session. Mixed crews from different species working together on actual relief operations, not just coordinating from a distance, but actually getting their hands dirty solving problems together. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either thunderous applause or complete rejection. Marcus held his breath, watching alien faces and energy patterns and crystalline resonances as beings processed the implications of what he'd just suggested. Humans working alongside Zephyrians, alongside Veltar, alongside Crystal Communion members, the Thoughtweaver representative said slowly. Species with fundamentally different approaches to problem-solving attempting to coordinate in real-time crisis situations. "Exactly," Marcus said. "Look, you all have incredible capabilities. The Crystal Communion can manipulate matter at the molecular level. The Zephyrians have biomechanical integration that lets them interface directly with their technology. The Veltar have analytical capabilities that can process information faster than most species can think. The Thoughtweavers can coordinate group consciousness across interstellar distances." He gestured around the chamber. "But you use all these amazing abilities in isolation because your political structures assume that different species can't work together directly. What if you're wrong? What if the reason galactic civilization has been stagnating is that you've never actually tried to combine your capabilities?" Empress Zarathul spoke into the thoughtful silence that followed. "The human raises an interesting point. Zephyrian biomechanical integration could be significantly enhanced by Crystal Communion molecular manipulation capabilities. The efficiency gains alone would be remarkable. And Veltar analytical processing could provide real-time coordination for Thoughtweaver group consciousness," added Korthaz, his voice carrying growing excitement. The tactical applications would be extraordinary. Marcus could see the idea taking hold throughout the chamber. Beings who had spent centuries maintaining careful distance from each other were beginning to imagine what they might accomplish by actually working together. There would need to be extensive preparation, the Iron Brotherhood representative said, but their tone suggested consideration rather than rejection. Communication protocols, safety procedures, compatibility testing, all of which can happen while we're actually helping people, Marcus pointed out. You learn more about working with someone in one day of crisis response than in a year of formal preparation meetings. The human suggests learning by doing rather than preparing indefinitely, observed the Eternal Seeker's representative. The human suggests that preparation without practical application is just another form of procrastination, Marcus corrected. Another moment of silence, then Coordinator Valsheen's crystalline form began resonating with frequencies Marcus had never heard before. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like crystal bells singing in harmony, and it seemed to carry meaning beyond what the translation system could convey. "The Crystal Communion accepts the human proposal," she announced. "We will participate in mixed species response teams for the trial period. The Zephyrian Empire concurs, added Empress Zarathul, her skin patterns showing what Marcus recognized as anticipation mixed with determination. The Veltar Coalition agrees to participate, said Korthos. One by one, species throughout the chamber voiced their commitment to what Marcus was beginning to realize was the most radical change in galactic governance in over 1,000 years. Even some of the more conservative civilizations agreed to observer status, wanting to see how the experiment played out. "It's settled then," Marcus said, feeling slightly stunned by what they'd just accomplished. Mixed species rapid response teams with a 6-month trial period and full council review. "Now," said the Thoughtweaver representative, "we simply need to determine coordination mechanisms, command structure, resource allocation protocols." "Actually," Marcus interrupted, "we need to respond to the Kepler by 4-2 crisis. Everything else we can figure out along the way." The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. They weren't just approving a theoretical program, they were about to implement it immediately with real stakes and real consequences. The first mixed species rapid response operation in galactic history, Empress Zarathul said quietly. "Beginning in the next few hours. No pressure," Marcus muttered, then looked around the chamber at beings who were already pulling up shipping manifests and resource inventories and flight plans. "Okay, everyone, let's see if this crazy idea actually works." 6 hours later, Marcus found himself aboard a Veltar fast courier ship, part of a convoy carrying emergency supplies toward the Kepler 4 system. The ship's crew was unlike anything he'd ever imagined. A crystal communion engineer who could reshape the ship's hull in real time to optimize for different space conditions, a Zephyrian navigator whose biomechanical integration let her interface directly with the ship's consciousness, a Thoughtweaver communication specialist who could maintain telepathic contact with the entire convoy, and 3 humans, including Marcus himself. "Status report," requested Captain Silthara, the Veltar commander whose analytical capabilities let her process information from all ship systems simultaneously. "Crystal matrix optimization complete," reported the Crystal Communion engineer. "Hull efficiency increased by 37%. Biomechanical navigation interface fully synchronized," added the Zephyrian navigator. "ETA to Kepler 442 system, 14 hours, 18 minutes. Convoy coordination maintained across all vessels," the Thoughtweaver communications specialist announced. "No communication delays or data loss." Marcus looked around at his alien teammates, beings who had never worked together before today, watching them coordinate with an efficiency that would have impressed the best human crews he'd ever served with. "You know what?" he said to no one in particular, "I think this is actually going to work." And as the convoy raced through hyperspace toward a crisis that would test everything they'd just committed to, Marcus Chen, the mechanic who couldn't keep his mouth shut, realized that he'd just helped break the most powerful governing body in the galaxy, and in doing so might have finally made it capable of actually governing. The real test would come when they reached Kepler 442 and discovered whether his faith in the power of different species working together was justified, or whether he just orchestrated the most spectacular failure in galactic political history. The Kepler Symphony system looked like the aftermath of a stellar war. 3 planets that had once been green and thriving now showed the brown and gray scars of agricultural collapse, their surfaces dimmed by the dust kicked up from massive infrastructure failures. Emergency shelters dotted the continents like geometric rashes, each one housing thousands of beings whose entire way of life had been destroyed in the span of hours. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Veltar courier ship, watching the convoy deploy with a precision that would have been impossible under traditional council protocols. 18 ships from 7 different species, each one adapted for specific aspects of the relief operation, moving in perfect coordination toward the 3 affected planets. "I've never seen anything like this," Captain Silthara said quietly, her analytical mind processing data streams from across the convoy. "Multi-species coordination at this level should be impossible without months of preparation." "Maybe that's the problem," Marcus replied, watching a crystal communion vessel begin reshaping its hull into a configuration optimized for atmospheric entry. Maybe we've been telling ourselves that cooperation is harder than it actually is. On the main display, the Thoughtweaver communications specialist, who had asked Marcus to call her Echo, since her real name was apparently a complex telepathic concept humans couldn't pronounce, was maintaining real-time coordination between all 18 ships. Her species' ability to share consciousness across interstellar distances meant that every captain in the convoy could access the same tactical picture, every engineer could share real-time system status, every navigator could coordinate their approach vectors as if they were all part of a single distributed mind. "Convoy approaching primary planet," Echo announced, her mental voice somehow carrying the emotional undertones of all 18 crews simultaneously. "Local authorities are requesting immediate coordination with relief distribution centers." Marcus activated his personal comm, knowing that what he said next would either vindicate everything he'd argued for in the council chambers or prove that he was spectacularly wrong about the galaxy's capacity for change. "All ships, this is Chen," he said, using the informal command structure they'd improvised during the journey. "Remember, we're not here to follow protocols. We're here to solve problems. Trust your instincts, trust your teammates, and let's show the galaxy what happens when different species stop being afraid to work together." The response was immediate and heartwarming, a chorus of acknowledgments in 17 different languages and communication methods, but all carrying the same tone of determination and hope. The next 12 hours were the most chaotic and productive that Marcus had ever experienced. The Crystal Communion engineers worked with Zephyrian biomechanical specialists to create new forms of atmospheric processors, devices that could literally breathe life back into poisoned air. Veltar Analytical Systems coordinated with human ingenuity to identify the most efficient distribution networks for emergency supplies. Thoughtweaver telepathic networks connected isolated refugee camps, allowing separated families to communicate across continents. But it was the small moments that really drove home what they were accomplishing. Marcus watched a young Zephyrian engineer explain biomechanical principles to a human technician, their two-species approaches to technology combining to solve a power distribution problem that neither could have handled alone. He saw Veltar analysts working with Crystal Communion molecular manipulators to purify contaminated water sources, their different cognitive approaches complementing each other perfectly. And everywhere he saw beings who had never worked together before, discovering that their differences weren't barriers to overcome, but advantages to leverage. Marcus Echo's mental voice carried urgent undertones. "We have a problem developing on the third planet." Marcus pulled up the tactical display, seeing a new crisis unfolding in real time. A massive refugee camp had been established in a geologically unstable region, and seismic sensors were showing increasing activity that suggested an imminent collapse. "How many people?" he asked. "Approximately 400,000 beings," Captain Silthara reported. "Evacuation using conventional methods would require a minimum of 18 hours. Seismic analysis suggests we have less than 6 hours before catastrophic ground failure." Marcus stared at the display, his mind racing through possible solutions. Conventional evacuation was impossible. The camp was too large, the terrain too difficult, the time frame too short. Under normal circumstances, this would be the kind of disaster that everyone would call a tragic but unavoidable loss. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Echo, can you patch me through to all convoy ships simultaneously?" "Done." Marcus took a breath, looking around the bridge at beings from 4 different species, all of them waiting for him to come up with a solution to an impossible problem. "All ships. We have approximately 400,000 beings who need to be moved from an unstable geological zone in less than 6 hours. This is exactly the kind of problem that traditional protocols would tell us is unsolvable. Let me hear what happens when we ignore what's supposed to be impossible." The response was immediate and electric. Ships across the convoy began reporting on capabilities Marcus had never even imagined. The Crystal Communion vessels could create temporary matter bridges across impossible distances. The Zephyrian ships could extend biomechanical fields that would allow people to survive in vacuum for short periods. The Thoughtweavers could coordinate evacuation movements with telepathic precision. The Veltar could calculate optimal evacuation routes in real time. And the humans? The humans could coordinate all of it because their chaotic problem-solving approach turned out to be exactly what was needed to make impossible solutions work. Crystal Communion Vessels, I need you to create matter bridges from the refugee camp to stable ground, Marcus called out. Zephyrian ships deploy biomechanical protection fields along the evacuation routes. Thoughtweavers coordinate movement of people across the bridges. Veltar ships provide real-time analysis of geological stability. Human crews coordinate between all teams and adapt the plan as we go. 18 ships from 7 different species using technologies that had never been combined before, coordinating through improvised communication protocols, attempting something that no single species could accomplish alone. And it worked. Marcus watched in awe as streams of refugees moved across crystalline bridges that materialized out of thin air, protected by biomechanical fields that let them survive in conditions that should have been lethal, guided by telepathic coordination that prevented panic and confusion, all while Veltar analysts provided real-time updates on the shifting geological conditions. 400,000 beings evacuated safely in 5 hours and 37 minutes. I don't believe what I'm seeing, Captain Silthara said quietly, her analytical mind struggling to process what they'd accomplished. Neither do I, Marcus admitted. And I'm the one who suggested it. But the real impact wasn't just in the successful evacuation. It was in what Marcus could see happening among the crews throughout the convoy. Beings who had worked together for the first time were already planning future collaborations. Species that had maintained formal diplomatic distance for centuries were discovering genuine friendships. Technologies that had been developed in isolation were being combined in ways that exponentially increased their effectiveness. Echo, Marcus said, patch me through to the Galactic Council. I think they need to see this. The holographic display expanded to show the emergency session chamber back at Council headquarters, where representatives from dozens of species were monitoring the relief operation with expressions ranging from amazement to carefully controlled shock. Honored representatives, Marcus said, looking directly into the camera pickup, I'm reporting from the Kepler-42 system where mixed-species rapid response teams have just